Production underwriting for Ruckus has been made possible in part by the generous contributions from Fred and Lou Hartwig and from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon, and here are the Ruckettes. Kansas City Star editorial writer Yael Abul-Hakka, Gwen Grant, president and CEO of the Kansas City Urban League, media and communications consultant Mary O'Halloran, and joining us this week, attorney Steve Marakian with the firm of Wirsch, Hobbs and Marakian. Well, much of the talk about the recent school finance law in Kansas has centered, as one might expect, on the financial aspects. But another provision is also drawing scrutiny. It's the ending of tenure, a form of job protection for state public school teachers. Until now, a district could only fire a tenured teacher after going through a sometimes lengthy legal process. Backers of the new law say it will benefit students because districts can now more easily get rid of bad teachers. Teachers' unions obviously oppose the legislation and vow to fight it. So, Steve, what are some of the legal issues this law will likely raise?
Well, as is often the case, there's a distinction sometimes between what is legal and what is good policy. There's no prohibition against the state passing legislation that would either limit or even exclude districts from providing tenure for certain teachers. And this is not going to be at the college level. This would be at the lower secondary levels. And this legislation, though I haven't read it in its entirety, I don't believe it says that no district can establish any tenure policies at all. What troubles me more is not the limitations perhaps on tenure, because I think there should be some limitations, make it more difficult to obtain tenure, have the administrators do their job to make sure that teachers who aren't doing a good job in their first 3, 4, 5 years shouldn't be teaching. I'm more troubled by if there is not at least some ability by the districts and some requirement by the districts to provide some minimal level of due process for teachers before job termination. You know, teachers have in a very difficult situation from the standpoint that they occupy this loco parentis situation where kids are placed into their trust. They have great responsibilities dealing with children. And where there's great responsibility, they merit also some great protection. And I've represented many teachers. It's not as hard to fire a teacher as people think. They're subject to false accusations. They're subject to disgruntled parents.
Well, you don't just walk in the classroom and say you're finished. Don't you have to go through a somewhat lengthy process?
Well,
if the teacher has tenure?
It's not that lengthy. I believe there needs to be some at least minimal due process rights.
Well, let me ask you this final question. We'll move on. Do most professions have tenure?
No.
Okay.
I mean, not in private industry.
I mean, most professions, you are working, someone comes in and says, you're fired, you're fired.
Mike, the Kansas law for 50 years, and I'm surprised at your point of view, but I'm pleased with you. For 50 years,
so you may want to change it, Steve.
The courts have ruled, and the Due Process Act in Kansas is really a good one. There really hasn't been over the years troubles with principals and superintendents figuring out a way to get rid of poor teachers and keep good ones. After all, they have to go through a 3-year probationary period, and I don't know a single principal that can't figure out the law in the process.
Well, the principals and superintendents are former teachers, and they are sympathetic to teachers' unions and teacher union
they're responsible
for. I think when they sit in the administrator's chair, I think they're a lot less sympathetic with union viewpoints on a number of those factors. But however, Steve, I'm really surprised that I agree with you 100%.
Bad day for me.
Yeah, you're right. You're on a roll. But you know, the thing is, I agree with Steve also, Mary. 3 years, in my view, is too soon to grant tenure.
It's 5 in Missouri.
I think that a teacher needs to demonstrate the consistent pattern of high student achievement outcomes before they're granted tenure, and then you may have less.
So, Yael, what does this mean in a political sense to Governor Brownback if he signs the bill? He's running for re-election. We have the teachers' unions and people associated with teachers' unions who will be opposed. Is this going to be a major problem for him?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, that's their ilk. Their argument is the unions are ruining America. teachers are part of this union that's ruining America. We're going to stand up for the parents, we're going to stand up for the taxpayers, and we're going to make sure this union does not let the bad apples spoil the education of your children. Now, I will add that if this was really a big concern of the Republicans who made it an issue in the 12th or 13th hour, then we would have had hearings about it. All the things we're talking about today would have been discussed. Oh, it was 3 years too early, 4 years. There were no hearings on it. It was a sham issue at the very end where they were able to push something
to
that the Republicans
mollify Republicans so they would vote
want.
for the increase in funding
right.
to the school districts as ordered by the school district.
Mike,
By
this
the
was a
way,
gift to the Tea Party at very late at night. There were, as he said, there was no hearings. But this is not. There's no real protection for teachers. The protection is to keep them in their profession and keep them able to do their job. Why that is a problem for Republicans is hard to figure out.
all right, 2 local projects now on the front burner, either warm the heart or fire the opposition. The projects involve expanding an unbuilt streetcar system and revamping or rebuilding KCI. Despite the controversy, Yale writes that these projects could come to fruition thanks to what he terms the Just Say Yes crowd. These are the folks who recently voted to approve 5 ballot issues in Kansas City, Missouri, and previously backed the building of the Sprint Center, voted for a sales tax at the sports complex, and crossed state lines in 1996 to rebuild Union Station. Yale also notes, however, there are reasonable questions yet unanswered about both the airport and streetcar plans. So assuming you're part of the Just Say Yes crowd, Gwen, and I assume that, what is the major question you'd like answered about the streetcar program?
You know what they say about assumptions, about making assumptions, right? But, you know, I think there are a lot of questions that we need to ask. One, for me, is with regard to the expansion of the lines down Independence Avenue and Linwood Boulevard. I'd like to see some evidence that such an expansion will actually spawn economic development. There's no real evidence that that is the case.
Where would you get that evidence? How could you find out?
Well, are there any communities, any the best practices that we can look at to see what revenue this has been generated or what economic development has occurred going into inner city communities?
Well, you've looked into that, Yale. What do you think?
I think there's some evidence, and it's not compelling.
It's not compelling that it
when you get
produces
far
economic
away
development?
from downtown.
Right.
I mean, downtown is the test case where there is evidence that it is happening.
It's downtown, yes, but when you start going into other communities, especially inner city communities such as Independence Avenue and Linwood Boulevard, there would be some concerns. Other concerns would be about the real estate
Let's just do
tax.
one concern now.
Well, you asked me a question.
No, my question is what question? My question was what question do you have about it? I know. What is your question, Steve? Your office is downtown. You may be affected by the downtown streetcar line and others. What do you think? What's your question or concern?
My concern on the streetcars is the one that Gwen just raised and Yale mentioned. I think it's good for downtown, and I hope they do create it, build it, expand it. But I don't want to see it. Quite frankly, I've seen no compelling evidence that expanding it into the basically business district areas is going to be of great benefit. As far as the airport's concerned, I'm still not convinced by anything I've seen that we should put the money into these renovating the airport plans.
Mary, are you part of the Just Say Yes crowd?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Well, just say yes.
Remember that was the year 2000 Johnson County Charter theme song. Yes, yes. Well, not entirely. No, well, we're talking about the airport, a streetcar.
We're talking about streetcars right now, but
well,
in general, the idea that Yale outlines in his column.
Well, as we mentioned last week, I'm concerned about the finance of the streetcar into these new areas. We're talking about a tax that's kind of like we're going to tax those people who live along here, in the businesses who operate alongside, with sales tax and property tax. And no one has showed me that there's enough to tax there to pay. What percentage, I don't know. And with regard to I just want to say something about the airport.
Wait a second. We'll get to the airport. Now, what about the tax rate?
Yeah.
You have written over the years that Kansas City, Missouri runs the risk of getting a sales tax rate that is going to be a severe problem.
Yes, and I think that's really the biggest impediment to this election.
Yep.
I know there will be people who are concerned about the special property assessment as well, but those are only people who live about a third of the mile from the track. The big thing is, look at how huge that taxing district is. It does not take in the southwest corridor, it takes in the plaza and then goes all the way east to, almost 435. So it's a big area. Now, to Mary's question, yeah, they've done some figures showing that this tax will raise almost enough money, comma, with the federal money, comma, and a little extra money to do it.
Comma, if you get the federal money.
That's correct. That's correct.
Mary, what's your question, your major question about the airport?
My major question about the airport is, will people believe the report coming out of the Citizens Commission that the mayor appointed? I think that their standing in the community is improving, as a matter of fact. Because as time has gone on, the consensus in many different quarters, you're shaking your head, yes, I'm glad to see that, Gwen, because it's just my sense that people are saying, oh, people are moving to the middle. Really major fix-up, major redesign for maintaining the comfort level of our traditional airport, but not starting from scratch and bringing in the bulldozers. And that makes people feel good. So I'm looking forward to the new designs, the new proposals that come out.
When you write about the Just Say Yes crowd, is there a political division there, Republican versus Democrat, or civic activists versus people paying no attention? How would you categorize that?
Oh, I think, I was a takeoff, of course, on the Just Say No crowd,
right,
which is the people who just, will be good against anything. But I think in Kansas City, over the years, basically, many people have proven they will look at a project, and it's not Republican and Democrat, and it's often not even inner city versus Northland or whatever anymore. The zoo, oh, we're going to approve a zoo. Well, Northlanders voted for it. So I think it's not a political division, it's what's best for Kansas City. Now, both these projects, to quickly say, they might be best for Kansas City, but we don't have the final plans yet.
Too early to tell. Huh?
Yes, sir.
All right, former Kansas Governor Kathleen Sebelius left Topeka for Washington and now is leaving there after 5 years as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Sebelius resigned late last week after overseeing the troubled rollout of Obamacare. She's leaving at what some might consider a high point of the program. An estimated 7.5 million people signed up by the enrollment deadline, and the stubborn website now seems to work. Sebelius claims leaving was her choice. She was not fired. Asked, however, if the president asked her to stay on, she said, not exactly.
Well, it made it pretty clear that that really wasn't an option to stay on. I mean, I thought it was fair to either commit till January of 2017 or leave with enough time that he would get a strong, competent leader.
Well, now we hear that Governor Sebelius, Secretary Sebelius, may run for the U.S. Senate this fall against incumbent Senator Pat Roberts. Now, is Sebelius on the road to political redemption, Mary?
Well, I think that I'm not sure how much redemption she needs. When you take, Mike, when you take on a huge domestic issue and you the president puts it on your shoulders, and it is one of the most controversial matters, health care, no president, no leader in this country has been able to achieve. And she took it on, she made it a very, very significant mistake in the management of the rollout on the website and all that. But currently today, Mike, about 12 million more Americans get up every morning and have health care and know that they have health care that didn't have it before this all started. So if I were Kathleen Sebelius and I was looking at coming back to Topeka, now, her husband Gary didn't leave. He didn't go back to federal magistrate. He didn't go back to Washington. Her son is in KU and getting married soon. And, I would think she'd want to take some time off for this thing. But Stu Rothenberg in roll call, I guess it was, said, oh, very interesting. Democrats in Washington are pushing her to do this. But guess what, folks? We do already have a candidate for the United States Senate. That's
why
Taylor.
they want Kathleen Sebelius to consider running. I saw an item on the Star's website saying a Republican leader in Kansas says, yes, come to Kansas, Secretary Sebelius. We'll send you the money for bus fare. We're that eager for you to get into this campaign.
Well, Kathleen Sebelius has been a very successful politician in Kansas, and she has a lot of name recognition, and she probably, if it were not this year, and in the wake of the problems with the website and so forth, she would be a formidable candidate. This is not the time to run. She's not going to run this time. She shouldn't run. She would not win against Pat Roberts, particularly now, and despite Mary's glowing predictions with regard to how many people have insurance and so forth, and we can debate those numbers.
Facts, not
we can debate those numbers, but that's not the issue. The issue is, in Kansas particularly, people are not happy with the entire thing, including the website rollout. She would not win against Pat Roberts. This is not the time to do it.
Is she stigmatized for the rest of her career by the problems associated with the rollout of Obamacare?
I think she's stigmatized for a period until, if and when, it's working well in 6 or 8 or 10 years and doing all the things that people predict, many of the things people predicted. I mean, really, if you look at history, when people rolled out Social Security and they rolled out Medicare, and there are all kinds of, really at the time, there have been interesting stories in this, doomsaying things. Well, this is going to be the death of, you know, whatever. And it turned out, well, no, this is really what people needed. Now,
for example, George W. Bush, or for that matter, Harry Truman, leaving office at a very low level of popularity, and in years to come, that reputation is restored.
And just quickly, I think the point is that these kind of federal government programs, they are, as Mary said, they're massive, and there are going to be problems. There were huge problems under Sebelius, but in the end, what's the product that matters? And maybe her successor is the one who gets them all right and gets some credit for it, but Sebelius' name as the scapegoat will recede. I do think, real quickly, no, she will not run for Senate. I think she'd be an excellent senator. She's smart, but she's also like earned some rest now, so I don't think she'll run.
No, I don't think she'll run, and I think she should wait it out. But I don't think in politics you're never down forever. You can always come back. So you know,
Richard Nixon.
Down.
Let me wrap this up by quoting Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show, talking about Secretary Sebelius's departure. He said, "Now I know why being thrown under the bus is covered by Obamacare." It's been a while since the immigration debate has been front and center and on the front pages, but former Florida Governor Jeb Bush has brought it back with just 3 words, calling illegal immigration, although a crime, an act of love.
Yes, they broke the law, but it's not a felony. It's kind of it's an act of love. It's an act of commitment to your family.
Bush has been talked about as a potential Republican nominee for president, although his comments have been criticized by some in the party. Might this be the first step toward a change in how the GOP views the immigration issue? Yale?
Let's hope so. I mean, frankly, this is one of those issues that a lot of Republicans have a hard time defending. The let's deport them, let's go all the way and make sure we stigmatize people, many of whom want to be here, work hard. Are there problems? Absolutely there are with some immigrants, just like there are with some real live 100% Americans. We just found that out this week, in Overland Park. So there are so many immigrants who have come here legally. There are many who are here illegally, but act of love, yes, they want to, they want to make money, they want to have a good life, they want to send somebody back for their family. I think it's a good discussion point. I do think it's unfortunate that so many Republicans have initially attacked him and said, oh, there goes your chance of winning the presidency. No, I don't think it is.
And what are the alternatives, even that Republicans put forth? Deport people? You're not going to deport 11 million people. Secure the border, that's fine, but that doesn't do anything to the people in the country.
It's really ridiculous, and you would think that they would see the error of their ways and try to get on board and be supportive of immigration reform. Certainly, people get here, get into this country, and what he means about that act of love is you have a family member that's illegal. You don't want to be away from your family, and that can cause you to do some things that you shouldn't do. But to just deport the people, give them an opportunity to become a U.S. citizen. I think we benefit from that.
Let me put something up on the screen I want you to take a look at. I'll read, and then I want to get your comments and start with Steve. This is from Alex Castellanos. I guess I should say. He's a GOP consultant. He's on television periodically. He says the worst thing that can happen to a political party is not for voters to decide they don't like you. It's for voters to decide you don't like them. And that's where the Republican Party is right now. Yep. What do you think about that, Steve?
I think it's a very sage comment. And that's why I think when Bush did this, I think he's essentially announcing that he does plan to run. And he's smart. And any Republican who would want and to have a chance of success had better come around to the idea that there are a number of things we can do to revamp the immigration policy, which are meaningful changes that will not destroy America as we know it, but will give us an opportunity to both secure our borders, but at the same time have better guest worker programs and pathway to citizenship.
What do you do with the people who are here
Well, we don't have time in this program to go into all the things you can do.
Well, what about this? What about saying?
But I can tell you, you do not put them on buses and send them back to Mexico.
They have some legal rights, don't they?
Yes,
and even if they're in the country illegally.
Is that we can debate endlessly the various permutations. You cannot deport
here's
them
one
all,
permutation,
and you have to make
Steve.
changes.
Here's one permutation.
Republicans need to get back to the position where Hispanics think we don't hate them.
Romney had a position, and Chris Kobach has a position, and going to your point, there is a Republican position on this issue, and that is self-deportation.
No, that's not the Republican position. That was a statement by Romney that does not represent the view of the Republican
Party. Who does it represent?
He is the defeated candidate for president.
Your defeated candidate, and Chris Kobach gets elected year after year in Kansas.
Chris Kobach is not the Republican Party.
But you all have a platform.
What's Jeb Bush?
Well, what is he?
He's a former governor who is from an influential family.
Is he your candidate?
He might be.
Well, there you go. What's your plan?
My plan is to grant to people in this country who are here illegally.
Path to citizenship?
No. Every right as a citizen except the right to vote.
So
everything but that one.
Yeah, because that's one of the reasons Democrats are so eager to do something, is to get undocumented Democrats to go to the ballot box. Well, they get all the rights of Americans. They pay taxes. They just don't have the right to vote for a period of time. Even establish it for a period of time.
There was a time in this country when people who were here a certain amount of time and weren't
citizens. It really gets down to the voting rights issue.
You're not a real Republican.
It really does, and I'm glad you said that, because it really gets down to the voting rights issue. That's why.
It does on the Democratic side, right? That's why illegal immigrants are called undocumented Democrats.
To have the right to vote, basically.
It's far broader.
They don't want people who don't agree with their policies to have voting rights. It's that simple. That's what it's about.
This self-deportation thing is very real.
I'm going to ask Steve, the only other Republican in the room, is that the Republican policy, the party's policy, self-deportation?
No,
Romney was scorned by even people in the party.
Contrary to what some Democratic ideologues like to say, there are any number of good Republican plans out there that include things such as we've just talked about, which include pathways to citizenship and guest worker programs and all kinds of other things that do not involve rounding up 11 million people and deporting them.
All right, no roast and toast this week, so we can talk about the tragic shootings last Sunday at the Jewish Community Center and Village Shalom in Overland Park. 3 people were killed. The alleged assailant, a well-known racist and anti-Semite. The shootings occurred on Palm Sunday and the eve of Passover, 2 significant events in 2 of the world's major religions. The facts of the event are familiar to all of us, but what else? What can we or should we learn from this, if anything? Yale, let's start with you.
I guess I've kind of taken away 2 things. One is that the FBI and all these people who monitor some of these crazy, mostly right-wing wacko people need to do a better job. I mean, that's just, from reading the stories, it looks like this guy was on their radar. Obviously, he's been to jail. Obviously, apparently he was in witness protection. So that's one thing I take away from a law enforcement side. And I guess the other one is an obvious one, which is when people talk about divisions in this country, and often they're in religious frame of mind, look what happened here. This guy thought he was killing or wanted to kill Jewish people, and he killed 2 Methodists and a Catholic. So it's one of those, hatred does not win in the end, but we've got to overcome it with love and, you know, and respect for all. This is another indication to me of a lesson learned from that. Right?
Yeah, I think that, you know, here he's a convicted felon with a gun. So what do we do about our gun control issues? I mean, we've got to deal with that at some point. That's one thing. The other thing is that hatred and bigotry and racism and prejudice are all based in ignorance. And, you know, it's unfortunate that we had this heinous crime occur here in our community. And I don't know what you do about it, because it seems to me that the climate that we're living in right now seems to be really, really fueled by a lot of hatred and animosity for people who don't agree with you or don't look like you.
Mary?
Well, I think personally, 2 things for me. One is how much I just love the Jewish Community Center. You know, and what a treasure it is in this city. The great affectionate outpouring of the people of Kansas City for the Jewish community as a whole and for that particular place. And for him to violate the kind of sacred ground that it is, it's such a welcoming, every faith feels comfortable. It is a great place for the arts, for children, for all kinds of wonderful things. Marvin Schneller, who runs the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, put it this way, you know, as long as racism and violence come together, we're really not free, and we need to start talking about that more and shine a light into the dark places where these people do what they do.
Steve, 30 seconds.
You know, while the funeral's going on this Friday, the Phelps cult is going to be spewing out their hatred. And you mentioned Passover and Easter, and I think it's so ironic that we have this juxtaposition of evil with grace and forgiveness and love. And during this funeral, they'll be talking about forgiveness and love, and the Phelps clan will be spewing forth hatred. You know, I think it's fitting. What I take from this is that this horrible, cowardly crime committed at Passover and Easter, and yet we see that hatred and evil can be overborne by grace and love.
I think the act that was committed reminds us of the worst in mankind. The reaction from the public reminds us of the best. And that's Ruckus for this week. Back next Thursday at 7:30. Thanks for joining us, and good night.